Today we're going to be talking about Strand 4 Standard 2. So this has to do with hair found at a crime scene. So I'm going to stick here for a second because we're going to just quickly review the layers of the skin, kind of show you where we're talking about with the different strands of hair. So on this slide, I'm going to kind of wiggle my mouse around it so you can see. But you have the top layer, the superficial most layer of skin is the epidermis. That has no blood supply. As you can see, it's pretty uniform. So if you took intro, we did the Snickers lab for this one. And when we cut through the chocolate, we kind of made the analogy like chocolate's like the epidermis because it has uniform layers essentially. They kind of get pushed up and eventually sloughed off in the epidermis. Then you get to the dermis. You got a lot of activity happening in the dermis. So you can see we've got blood vessels. Red ones are arteries, blue ones are veins. We've got muscles. We have glands. You can just see the sebaceous gland here. There are sudoriferous glands as well that are sweat glands. So, and then the very bottom layer is the subcutaneous or the hypodermis layer. And there's a pretty good layer of fat right there. And then you get to like muscle, depending on where you are in the body. So we're going to talk about it in terms of like where the hair sits. So this is a hair follicle right here. And this is, anything that's outside the skin with a hair is considered the hair shaft. And the root of the hair is underneath that. So a couple of things associated with hair follicles. We have a sebaceous gland, so they're usually pretty active at your age. Sebaceous glands are their oil glands, and that's why younger people tend to have super flowy, beautiful hair because it's associated with some active sebaceous glands. You also have them associated with erector pili muscles. So whenever you're cold, you go outside and you're cold and your hairs kind of stand on end. That's because there's a muscle attached that allows that to happen. So there you go, kind of an overview of skin, and we're going to move forward. Okay, so like in the last slide, here are those 3 layers of skin again. So uniform cells, no blood vessels here. The dermis is here. We have the hypodermis here. So in the dermis, you can see right where these this is going to be representing oil. This is an oil gland, sebaceous gland. This is a sudoriferous gland, a sweat gland. So not always necessarily right next to a follicle, but it can be. And then let's see, we're going to go ahead and just start from a forensics perspective. What is it that we need to know about hair? Well, anything outside of the skin is the hair shaft. Okay. And then we get to the hair root, the rest of the hair, that's all this. This is the hair root, everything that's kind of within the skin. And then the hair follicle is the place where we pack the cells and we start to push those up. So that'll be right here. So see, there's blood supply associated with the hair follicle. There's a tiny little artery vessel and a vein vessel. Okay, so hair shaft, hair root, hair follicle, you need to know those. Okay, and then if we take just one individual hair and we were to do like a transverse cut, and obviously this would need to be done under a pretty high-powered microscope. So another reason for understanding what a microscope does. Wish we had some to play with out in the wild where we are. But basically, if we took a transverse cut of a hair, you have going from out to in. It kind of looks like when you suck on a gobstop for a little bit, but don't suck on your hair. So outer portion is the cuticle, and then the inner portion of the hair is the cortex, and the medulla sits in the middle. So basically, hair is dead skin cells, and it's composed of the protein keratin. And when those are kind of placed together and packed in, that's going to produce a hair. Keratin also makes up your fingernails and your toenails. So something that, fun fact, bikes, if you wanted to ensure that your hair is staying healthy and flowy, might be a good idea to supplement a little bit of keratin. You can do that. Okay, so in forensics, there are a couple places within a hair strand that we can find DNA. So that would be very vital for a forensic scene. So let's say that we only get a hair shaft. So that means, like, if I were to pull a hair and not have anything of the root, what kind of DNA would be in that? So potentially in every hair, you have what is called nuclear DNA. And nuclear DNA is just like the name sounds, it's DNA that exists within the nucleus of the cell. So that means that it's kind of got to be a live cell. And then you've got mitochondrial DNA, which is not as testable, doesn't have as much information as nuclear DNA, but it still is something that they can test for. So the mitochondrial DNA is located within the shaft of the hair. You will not find any nuclear DNA within the shaft of the hair. So everything outside of the root will not have nuclear DNA, but you could, if you pulled it straight from the root, you can have some nuclear DNA. Okay, so this is going through the growth cycle of an individual hair. So if you're like me, you'll find that you have, like, it seems to me like right in the front, I always have some new hair growth where I've got some real good tweakers. So when we're in class and I walk by the projector and you can see the shadow, you can see all my good tweakers. That comes because each little follicle is going through its own growth cycle. So starting with anagen, here we have a good blood supply. It's actively packing basically the dead skin cells in and keratinizing it and pushing it up through the root. So the hair cells are dividing at a rapid rate and it's just being pushed up. It has a nourishing blood supply. In the catagen phase, it's cut off from its blood supply and it's still growing. It's still within the follicle. It lasts about 2 weeks. And in that time, the hair follicle is going to shrink. And so again, hair's still in the root, still kind of growing, but eventually with it detached from its blood supply, it'll go to the next phase. So in the telogen phase, the resting hair remains in the follicle until it's pushed out by a new hair. So the telogen phase is we're cut off from the blood supply. This is starting to get kind of pushed out. And then in the anagen onset, so now we've got new blood supply here. This hair is actually, there's going to be a new hair that starts to rapidly divide and grow out. And eventually it's going to push it out. So in the exogen phase, that's exactly what happens. Now we've got a brand new hair that's growing and it's going to push out that old hair. So exogen is basically the shedding phase. So every single hair on your head throughout your body is in a different stage of growth cycle. These are the stages of that growth cycle. Okay, lastly on this slide, hair follicles are being dependent on healthy skin. So let's say that you're a person who is actively coloring your hair or constantly putting toxins on it. If you use a lot of product, if you color your hair, if you use a lot of heat on your hair, then you end up with hair that maybe has seen better days. Let's say it like that. So sometimes it can be seen by thinning, dry, brittle hair. I picked some dry, brittle hair for the picture. Sometimes bald patches. If you have that constant exposure to toxins, it will affect the DNA that they can test. So that will change what information maybe a hair can give them. So that's basically it on hair in forensics. And I'll have an assignment that's related for you to do. That's kind of another lab. So we'll just keep plugging away online. If you guys have questions for me, please email. That's the best way to get me because it comes to my phone. And remember, everything's on announcements. Thanks.